The first time I heard about the Hollinger family, I thought it was just another Appalachian ghost story. One of those tales people whisper at bonfires to scare the newcomers. But the truth didn't come from campfire folklore. It came from a state archive in West Virginia, inside a box that hadn't been opened in 63 years. Inside were brittle documents, corroded metal tags, and a single black and white photograph so warped by moisture that the faces looked stretched, almost melted, like they were trying to pull themselves out of the frame. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. At first glance, it appeared to be a simple family portrait from the late 1800s. But when I counted the people, 9 children, 2 adults, all standing far too close to one another, something felt wrong. Their eyes seemed identical, their cheekbones strangely mirrored, like someone had copied the same face over and over again. Genetic resemblance isn't unusual within families, but this was something else, something deeper, something unnatural. For 2 centuries, the Hollinger family lived on a secluded ridge, known only to old geological maps. Hollinger's Rest. Locals didn't go near it. They claimed the family didn't mix with outsiders, didn't trade, didn't attend church, and rarely left the property. Those who did claim to have seen them described the same eerie detail. The entire family spoke in whispers, even when standing several feet apart, as though they were terrified of being overheard by someone, or something else. No one thought much of these rumors until 1974, when the graveyard was discovered. A mining survey team, clearing brush for a new access road, found a collection of headstones buried beneath collapsing soil. But what made them stop? What made one of the surveyors quit his job the very next day? Was the realization that the dates didn't make sense. Some headstones belonged to individuals who lived remarkably long lives for the era. Others bore 2 dates that overlapped in impossible ways, as though a person had died twice. And then there were the symbols, carved into the back of every headstone, repeating patterns, concentric circles, spirals, some resembling chromosomes, others resembling eyes. Eyes that all seemed to be watching each other, and watching whoever found them. The state sent in an archaeological team 3 weeks later. Nothing about the graveyard suggested anything criminal, not yet. But the historians wanted answers, and more importantly, the mining company wanted to know if the land was safe. The first shock came when they lifted the soil from the oldest grave. The coffin's wood was almost entirely gone, eaten away by centuries of rain and insects, but the bones were pristine, perfectly preserved, smooth, almost polished, as though someone had cared for them long after burial. The second shock came when they realized the graves were arranged in pairs. 2 individuals per stone, not husband and wife, as the dates suggested, but siblings. Every pair shared the same birth year. Every pair shared nearly the same facial structure. And the deeper the researchers dug, the more unsettling the pattern became. Each generation looked more and more alike. Not similar, identical. As if the same face had been passed down again and again, like a mold repeatedly reused. That discovery alone was disturbing, but it was nothing compared to the third shock. The skulls had been opened, every single one. Thin, deliberate cuts ran along the tops, like surgical autopsies. But these burials were from the early 1007, hundreds long before local doctors would have had such tools or techniques. Someone had been studying them, someone within the family. Locals refused to talk about it, even when pressed. The older residents of the nearby town of Deep Vale only shook their heads when researchers came asking questions. One elderly man, who finally agreed to speak, gave the same warning twice, as though terrified of saying too much. "They didn't let the blood leave," he whispered, "not for hundreds of years. You want to know what they were hiding? Look at the children. Look at how they all had the same eyes." When asked why the skulls were cut open, he looked away. They wanted to know how much sameness a person can hold before God stops recognizing you. He refused to say more, and the researchers soon learned why. A journal was found beneath one of the coffins, wrapped in oilcloth, sealed in pitch, protected as though it was the most valuable item the family owned. It belonged to Elias Hollinger, dated 1821. Most of the pages were filled with dense handwriting written in a dialect no longer spoken, but a few passages were clear, unmistakable, and chilling. The blood must continue unspoiled. One page read, "Father says it is the only way to preserve the gift." Another page was even worse. "The outsiders bring sickness of the mind. They change faces. They break the circle. We cannot let the circle break. The blood must remain pure." At first, historians assumed it was simply a delusion, a family obsessed with isolation and tradition. But when the bones were analyzed, the truth was far more disturbing. All 7 generations showed extreme genetic similarity. Too similar, no variation, no branching lines, no dilution. It was as if the family tree was not a tree at all, but a single line looping into itself again and again. But the strangest discovery came from the skulls. Inside each one, faint marks suggested that something had been removed. Something soft, delicate, and small. Not organs, not tissue, patterns, folded structures, traces of repeated ridges, as though someone had scraped them clean. A neuroscientist, brought in to examine the evidence, leaned back from the table after reviewing the scans. "They were removing parts of the brain that show individuality," she said quietly. "Specific ridges associated with personality, memory, and self-identity. Whoever did this wasn't preserving the bodies. They were studying how much of a person can be taken away while still leaving them functional." The question was, who was doing this? Elders, parents, a designated family surgeon. The journal provided one final clue. 6 words, scrawled in frantic handwriting across the last page. "Not all of us survive the sameness." That line unsettled even the investigators. Because there were graves, too many graves, with no names, no dates, just a single symbol carved into each stone, a spiral collapsing inward, as if to say the person buried there had disappeared inside their own bloodline. The deeper the excavation went, the more the truth resisted being uncovered. Tools malfunctioned, weather shifted abruptly. 2 workers separately complained of hearing whispering at night, whispers that sounded like children repeating a prayer in a language they couldn't place. One worker claimed he saw someone standing at the ridge line, just beyond the survey lights, a pale figure, unmoving, watching them until sunrise. But the most alarming moment came when the researchers unearthed the final row of graves. These were the most recent, dating to the late 1930s. Inside, the bones looked different, misshapen, twisted. Some were elongated, others were fused together. One skeleton showed signs of having an extra rib cage. Another had a jawbone that appeared to have attempted to split in 2. The geneticist on the team stared at the remains and whispered, "This isn't normal inbreeding. This is something cultivated, guided." The Hollinger family hadn't simply married their own siblings for 200 years. They had been shaping themselves, transforming themselves, trying to achieve something. And for the first time, the researchers understood why the townsfolk were terrified of talking. One man finally broke the silence, his eyes wet with the fear he hadn't felt since childhood. "They weren't trying to keep people out," he said. "They were trying to keep something inside." When asked what he meant, he described rumors passed down from his grandfather. Tales of children born without voices. Children born with too much memory. Children who could look at a person and repeat conversations word for word that happened years before. He said the family believed they were creating a perfect inheritance, not physical, but mental. Something like shared memory across generations, a family that all thought the same, felt the same, remembered the same, a single consciousness, spread across multiple bodies. That's why they whispered. They didn't need to speak. They were only repeating what the others already knew. And that was why the graves were opened. because the family was trying to understand why some members couldn't hold the shared identity, why some broke under the weight of sameness, and why some changed. The spiral symbols suddenly made sense. Those were the ones who collapsed, whose minds turned inward, whose bodies followed. The final discovery came from a root cellar beneath the remains of the family home. The structure had collapsed long ago, but the cellar was intact enough for the team to enter. Inside were glass jars filled with formaldehyde, rows of them. Some contained what looked like small samples of bone. Others held thin preserved tissue. But one jar at the far end contained something larger, a human brain, but not an ordinary one. This brain had ridges that repeated themselves with unnatural symmetry, like patterns cloned in loops. Even the scientist who examined it couldn't hide her horror. It's like the brain was trying to fold into the same shape over and over. She whispered, like it was collapsing into itself. Next to the jars lay another journal, this one much more coherent, written by Samuel Hollinger in 1934. He described the family's belief in the gift, a mental ability supposedly preserved only through absolute genetic purity. According to the journal, the earliest Hollingers believed each generation lost fragments of knowledge, but through strict bloodline control, those fragments could be retained, passed down, and strengthened. A collective memory, a shared mind, but something went wrong. One passage described it chillingly. The more identical we become, the more the mind resists the joining. The flesh follows the mind. Too much sameness breaks the vessel. The journal ended with a final note. The children are beginning to hear the voices even before birth. They speak in unison. They speak the old words, but the bodies are failing. We can preserve the mind, but not the form. The researcher reading it closed the book with trembling hands. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? The team packed up what they found and prepared to leave. But one of the workers noticed fresh footprints in the cellar dust. Bare footprints, small, child-sized. They led toward the back wall and then vanished. No one on the team had gone near that area, and no one could explain how the dust had been disturbed. The state immediately sealed the site, and the remains were transported to a secure facility for further study. But the scientists reviewing the bones and journals reported something unsettling. The samples were degrading far faster than expected, as if exposure to the outside world was causing them to break down. Photographs taken of the skulls showed subtle changes over the course of days, tiny cracks forming, ridges fading, bones becoming brittle, almost like whatever held the family together only worked while they stayed on their land. Almost like the bloodline itself resisted being understood. Meanwhile, the townspeople grew restless. Strange sightings near Hollinger's Rest multiplied. Glimpses of pale shapes in the tree line. Soft whispering near the old mine entrance. Reports of a child's voice calling names no one recognized. Some claimed the family hadn't died out, that a few descendants survived the collapse of the lineage, that they fled into the woods long before authorities arrived, and that those descendants might still carry fragments of the shared mind, just enough to feel the pull of the ridge. One night, a sheriff's deputy responding to a break-in near the excavation site reported seeing a girl standing barefoot in the road. Her hair was pale, almost white, and her skin was nearly translucent. When he spoke to her, she didn't respond. She only tilted her head, as if listening to someone else. Then she whispered, "We remember you." Before he could react, she ran into the forest so fast he couldn't catch her. The next morning, the deputy resigned without explanation. As rumors spread, the state quietly halted all investigations. The bones were locked in storage, the journals were sealed, and anyone asking questions was given the same answer. There was nothing unusual about the Hollinger family. But the workers who were there know the truth. The scientists know the truth. The locals always knew. The Hollingers didn't just marry their own siblings for 200 years. They were trying to merge themselves, to become one. And something about that, something about forcing the mind and body to become identical, left a mark that didn't die with them. A mark that might still be walking in the woods, watching, listening, remembering. Most people who hear about the Hollingers assume the story ends with the excavation. That once the graves were studied and the journals were stored away, the past returned to the ground where it belonged. But that's not how history works. Some stories don't die. They sleep. And every so often, they wake up just enough to remind us they were never buried deep enough. Months after the site was closed, hikers reported strange patterns carved into the bark of trees along Hollingers' rest spirals, repeated again and again, circling inward. The same spirals found on the unnamed graves. The same spirals drawn on the cellar walls. Forestry officials claimed it was the work of vandals, but no footprints were found. No tool marks either. It was as if the symbols were carved with something sharper than a blade, yet left no trace of the tool that made them. Later, a biology professor who had taken part in the excavation went missing while traveling alone in the region. His camera was found near a stream. The last photo he took was of a pale figure standing half hidden behind a tree. But the strangest part, the leaves behind the figure were blurred, as if the background was moving around it, like reality itself didn't want to capture the shape. People who live near the ridge say there are nights when the air feels heavy, like someone is standing behind you even when you're alone. Nights when the woods fall completely silent. Nights when you swear you hear whispering, soft, layered, as though dozens of voices are speaking the same words at slightly different moments. Some say the remaining descendants are still trying to complete what their ancestors started, that they roam the woods searching for others like them, or for those who trespass too close to the graveyard. Or maybe, just maybe, they're trying to rebuild the collective mind their family once shared. Others believe the truth is simpler but far more terrifying, that the family succeeded, that somewhere in those mountains, a consciousness split into many bodies still moves in perfect unison, watching, waiting, preserving the sameness. Whatever the case, there's a reason the state refuses to reopen the site, a reason the journals remain sealed, a reason the locals still cross themselves when the ridge is mentioned. Some truths are too heavy for a single mind to carry, and the Hollinger family spent 2 centuries trying to create a mind that could bear the weight. If you ever find yourself deep in those woods, and you hear whispering that seems to echo from inside your own thoughts, do not answer, because once the Hollingers remember you, they never forget.